inflation, abortion, the southern border, all major policy issues that are likely to dominate the 2024 presidential race. But of course, this time around, we have a specific, unique one, and that is age. Former President Donald Trump, he's only 3 years younger than President Biden. But it's an issue for voters, President Biden's age, and Donald Trump has gone right ahead mocking the current president over it.
So he's totally incoherent. And he goes, thank you.
Okay, here's the thing, though. Trump himself, not immune to making mistakes that could be attributed to his age.
Well, thank you very much, and a very big hello to a place where we've done very well, Sioux Falls. Thank you very much, Sioux Falls. So, Sioux City, let me ask you. You know, I was very honored as a man. Viktor Orban, anyone ever hear of him? He's probably like one of the strongest leaders anywhere in the world, and he's the leader of, right? He's the leader of Turkey.
Notably, Viktor Orban, not the leader of Turkey. He is the prime minister of Hungary. This topic is the subject matter of a new article in the New York Times called How Trump's Verbal Slips Could Weaken His Attacks on Biden's Age. Let's bring in the lead author of that piece, New York Times political correspondent Michael Bender. Mike, thank you so much for being up early, especially after Halloween night with little kids. But I loved your story. And this obviously has been something that the Ron DeSantis campaign has also, in the kind of last minutes of the Republican primary, really started to focus in on. What do you think the effect of that's going to be?
Well, I think the effect here is going to be, or could be, pretty harmful for Trump. One of the new things in our article is we looked at some polling questions that a lot of pollsters are asking now. Do you think Trump is too old to run for office? And then the second question, do you think Biden is too old to run for office? Now, about two of every three voters say Biden is too old. And about half of America thinks Trump is too old. What we asked the pollsters to do was to look at the number of people who said both candidates are too old. And that is a pretty stunning 40% of the country. And to dive just a little bit deeper with me here, in that 40%, Biden is winning about 60% of those voters. Now, I will say Democrats are much more likely to acknowledge their candidate's age than Republicans are willing to acknowledge an issue with their candidates. But that wide gap, what that shows is that if more people start to think Trump is too old, which these kind of gaffes and verbal slips could do, Trump could really pay a price in a head-to-head matchup with Biden.
What's your sense, Mike, we have seen voters be willing to forgive Donald Trump for political sins that no other politician would be forgiven for. And I guess my question is, how do you think it applies around this question? Because there is kind of a difference in the way Joe Biden and Donald Trump present, that maybe it's not age exactly, but there is a level of energy that's just different. And voters do seem to be willing to say, well, Trump's just being Trump.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right about that. Trump's kind of just like the brute force that he speaks with. The bright shades of orange he keeps his hair and skin definitely present younger than Biden. And some of the flubs you showed earlier. I mean, mixing up cities you're in as a politician who's campaigning regularly. Voters have never punished candidates for that kind of thing in particular. But taken as a whole, these kind of episodes are piling up. The things that you showed and that we've talked about. Yeah, he's asked his voters not to vote in a kind of ramble he gave in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago. He talked about beating Barack Obama in 2016 when it was obviously Hillary Clinton. These were all in the last couple of months. I would say A and B. What makes these important right now is that these are central to Trump's argument against Biden. And what this boils down to is a capability argument. Trump is saying that he is better suited, more fit for office. And if he's making the same kind of slips and mistakes that he is mocking Biden for, it undermines his argument and really what is a central Republican meme heading into 24.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important point. And to be fair to politicians or members of bands on tour, or you and I have both been campaign reporters, I certainly have lost track of what city or state or place in the world I was sleeping in on a given night. Michael Bender of the New York Times, I really appreciate your time this morning. I hope you'll come back.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.